Shavua Tov, everyone. We are Sunday night, Sunday evening, and we are continuing in Ezra Nechemia. Today we have a very, very interesting perek chapter, perek Yud. Last week, as you recall, we discussed the amazing history of Am Yisrael through perek Tet. How Ezra and Nechemia, they go over everything that happened, and we really saw everything, awaken again. This chapter, Perek Yud, is all about a new agreement between Am Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shmirat HaTorah, observing the Torah, observing the Mitzvot. But we're going to see something, I think, pretty amazing. Mamash, mamash, mamash. I really think it's going to be something very, very special. We're going to read about an agreement, and the agreement that is mentioned in our chapter in Perek Yud is very, very unique. It's a very, very unique document, and there's absolutely no parallel in the entire Tanakh that consists these two parts. The first part that we're going to be learning from Pasuk Aleph all the way into Pasuk Lamed, 30 Psukim, but when you look in your Tanachim, when you look at Sefer Nechemia, you'll see most of the Psukim are very, very small because it's names. So the first part really contains the signatories to the agreement that we're going to be reading. And the second part deals with the content of the agreement. So really today, we're going to discuss mainly the second part. We're just going to really go through the names of the first part just so we can read the Ketuvim. And the agreement that we're going to see, starting from Pasuk Lamed and Lamed Aleph, really, it has a number of regulations, takanot. And there's a fundamental, we're going to see a fundamental difficulty, a true difficulty in the list of the takanot that is introduced in Perek Yud. In light of a certain pasuk, I'll just tell you now, pasuk Lamed is going to pose a very difficult time for us of understanding what comes after pasuk Lamed. But let's jump right in. Pasuk Aleph, Perek Yud, pasuk Aleph. We're just going to go through it really quickly. It's really just the fact that Am Yisrael in Yehuda and Yerushalayim are entering an agreement, and their names basically of those who entered it and those who signed on the document. Similar, I guess, to the declaration of Atzmaut of Medinat Israel, where you have important people signing the document. The same way here. So we're going to really see the signatories divided into four different groups. The first group of those who are signed are Nechemia, and then we have the Kohanim, and then we have the Leviim, and then the heads of state, mamash, the hierarchy, right? Nechemia, who's the leader, the political leader of Am Yehuda at this time, the Kohanim, the spiritual leaders, the Leviim, and then the heads of state, Rashi Ha'am, the different heads of families, I guess. And then after that, we have the rest of the nation. So let's just jump right in. So Pasuk Aleph. Uvechol zot, even after everything that we went through until now in Perek Tet, Chazara b'tshuva, אנחנו כורתים אמנה וכותבים ועל החתום שרינו לוויינו וכהנינו. ממש an agreement, like a regular agreement, the way we would expect. So because of everything that happened, the Psukim tell us the people of Israel hereby make a solemn written agreement, and with the leaders, the Kohanim, Leviim, and everyone else. Pasuk Bet ve'al hachatumim, and now we're just going to really read the Hebrew, go through it really quickly. These are the chatumim. First and foremost, Nechemia, Hatirshata ben Chachalya, veTzidkiya. right? Tzidkiah was an important person. We know that. We've seen him before. So the first signatory is the governor, Nechemia, and then Tzidkiah, and then following them, we have, and I'm just going to read right through, so please follow from Pasuk Gimel all the way down to Pasuk Kaftet, right? From the third Pasuk all the way down to the 29th Pasuk, but they're very short. We shouldn't spend too much time on it. So Pasuk Gimel, Sraya, Azariah, Yirmiyah, Pashhur, Amaria, Malkiah, Chatush, Shvanya, Maluch, Charim, Merimot, Ovadia, Daniel, Ginton, Baruch, Mishulam, Aviyah, Miyamin, Ma'azia, Vilgai, Shmaya, Ele Kohanim. These are the Kohanim, the first group that we mentioned, priests, the spiritual leaders. And now we get to the Levim, Veha-Levim. Who are they? Yeshua ben Azaniah, Binui, Mibnei Chanadar, Kadmiel, Ve'achihem and their brothers, Shvenya, Hodiah, Klita, Playa, Hanan, Micha, Rechov, Chashvaya, Zakur, Shereviah, Shvanya, Hodiah, Bani, Beninu. So those were the groups of the important Levim. You could see there's not a lot of leaders here because there weren't that many Jews in Israel at that time. Most stayed in Bavel. And now the Rashi Am, the leaders of the nation themselves, the heads of families, heads of state. That's Pasuk Tetvav 15. Who are they? Rashi Am, Parosh, Pachat, Moav, Elam, Zatu, Bani, Buni, Asgad, Bevai, Adoniah, Bigvai, Adin, Ater, Chizkiah, Azur. Continuing, Hodiah, Chashum, Beitzai, Charif, Anatot, and Nevai, Magpiash, Meshulam, Chazir, Meshezav'el, Tzadok, Yadua, Platia, Hanan, Anya, Hoshea, Hanania, Chashuv, Halochesh, Bilcha, Shovek, Rechum, Chashavanya, Maaseh, Ve'achia, Hanan, and the last pasuk in Kavzai, Maluch, Charim, Ba'ana. We can see there are more families than there are Kohanim and Levim, right? We see that there are more Kohanim than Levim, and there's most of Am Yisrael. And then comes Ush'ar Ha'am HaKohanim, HaLevim, HaShoarim, HaMeshorerim, that's pasuk Kaftet, HaNetiim, V'chol HaNivdal Me'amei HaAratzot El Torat HaElohim, Neshehem, B'neihem, Uvnotehem, Kol Yodea Mevin. So pasuk Kaftet, basically it means that we, the people of Israel, all of Am Yisrael, basically the Kohanim, Levim, all the guards who guard the Beit HaMikdash, all the musicians, all the workers in the Beit HaMikdash. We know that the Beit HaMikdash is very central to Yerushalayim, and all of the others who, in obedience to Hashem's halacha and law, have separated themselves from the foreigners living in our land, right? They wanted to find the Zera Kodesh, which we mentioned both in the time of Ezra and now in the time of Nechemia, really creating a unique nation. Everyone together with their wives and all their children, old enough to understand, everybody is there, and they are all accepting upon themselves this agreement. The agreement that starts in Pasuk Lamed. And now it gets a little bit tricky. It really does. Not Pasuk Lamed, but after we read Pasuk Lamed, when we actually read the content, the actual actions that they're agreeing to, you're going to see very quickly that it in a way doesn't fit in with Pasuk Lamed. Pasuk Lamed, let's read it out loud. We machazikim al achihem adirihem uvaim be'ala ubishvu'a ללכת בתורת האלוהים אשר ניתנה ביד משה עבד האלוהים. Basically, they're saying all these people that we just mentioned in the previous pasuk, we hereby join with our leaders and we take an oath, a shvu'ah, under the penalty of a curse, right? Be'ala uvishvu'ah, right? Under the penalty of a curse, that if we break it, that we promise to live according to Torat. This is where it gets tricky. Torat HaElohim, the Torah of God, asher nitna biyad Moshe eved ha'Elohim, meaning the Torah that we know it today, that was given to Moshe Rabbeinu behar Sinai, and we promise that we will obey. Nitna biyad Moshe eved ha'Elohim lishmor ve'la'asot et kol mitzvot Adonai Adonenu u'mishpatav ve'chukav, that we will obey all that Hashem has decreed and commanded us, and that we will keep all his laws and requirements. Ad kan hakol tov, meaning it's an agreement to accept Torat Moshe, to accept Taryag mitzvot, to accept everything that was given to us mishamayim, right? Torat Elohim asher nitna biyad Moshe. Now in this verse, it says explicitly that the people accepted everything in the written law of Moshe Rabbeinu. But as we're going to see now, almost all of the mitzvot that they'll be accepting upon themselves, besides maybe one, we're going to see 7, so 6 for sure, out of the 7 that are listed, are actually mitzvot de Rabbanan. They're actually mitzvot de Rabbanan, and not de Oraita. They don't come from Torat HaElohim. They don't come from Torat Moshe. Very interesting. We're gonna go one by one. So in Pasuk Lamed, it says that they're accepting upon themselves Torat Hashem Elokim Shenatan LeMoshe Rabbeinu. But as we're gonna go through these 6 out of the 7 for sure, mitzvot they're accepting upon themselves, they're all rabbinic. They're all derabana. They were not given l'chora by Hashem behar Sinai biyad Moshe, meaning they're rabbinic in nature, not from the written law. So just to really understand what we're dealing with, let's go over them now, and you'll see very quickly what I'm talking about. So first of all, the next 7 mitzvot that we're going to be reading are divided into 2 groups. 1 through 3, the first 3 mitzvot are general regulations that deal with the nature of society. Okay, we'll see what we're talking about in a minute. Like intermarriage has to do with society, Shemitah that we have today, and then the next 4 after that. So the first 3 are more to do with society. The next 4 deal with things and mitzvot that are related to the Beit HaMikdash. So there are 2 groups. The first group, 1 through 3 mitzvot, are to do with the society, and the next 4 have to do with building the Beit, contributing to the Beit HaMikdash. So let's go to the first one that is mentioned in Pasuk Lamed Aleph. Okay, we are now Pasuk Lamed Aleph. Okay, this is the agreement. This is what they're accepting upon themselves. Again, in your mind, have that in their minds, it's Torat Hashem. Torat Hashem. Okay, so let's start. Lamed Aleph. Va'asher lo niten benotenu le'amei haaretz ve'et benotihem lo nikach levanenu. So basically, it's a ban on intermarriage. A ban on intermarriage. So we have to realize that a ban on intermarriage at this point, in this period, there's a dispute amongst the Tanaim. There's a Masechet called Masechet Avodah Zarah. In Masechet Avodah Zarah, there is a machloket as to whether the prohibition of intermarriage, meaning marrying a non-Jew, is from the Torah or is it a Gzeira de Rabbanan? There's a machloket. Where is it? According to Pasuk Lamed, everything that comes after Pasuk Lamed is Torat Hashem Elokim, meaning it's not rabbinic, it's mamash me Hashem. But we already see, based on the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, that intermarriage is not, there's a machloket if it's rabbinic or me'atorah. Now, according to the pshat in the psukim, which I'm going to share with you in a minute, intermarriage that is asur me'atorah, or based on the pshat, is only the 7 nations. The 7 nations. Shivat ha'amim. So if you have a Tanakh in front of you, you can open up and I'll share my I'll share my my daf mekorot that I made. Let's make sure that I have it. Bring it. For some reason everyone with me? Back. Okay. Okay, I hope everyone is you guys see me, hear me? Yes, okay, thank you, Nomi. Good. Okay, so I'm going to show you the first pasuk that I'm dealing with about intermarriage, right? In Dvarim, it says, let me just make it a little bit bigger. In Dvarim it says kacha. Ki yaviacha Adonai Elohecha el haaretz asher ata ba shama lerishta. V'nashal goyim rabim mipanecha. When we come to Eretz Yisrael, when we finally enter Eretz Yisrael, there will be many, many nations there. Meaning Achiti, Girgashi, Emori, Kinaani, Prazi, Chavi, Vayivusi. They're called the Shiva Goyim. And here, Untanam Adonai Elohecha lefanecha, Hashem will give them to us, meaning that we will be able to conquer them. Of course, first we have to ask, according to the Rambam, I mentioned this on Shabbat too in my drasha, according to the Rambam, we don't just go out to war with them. We have to first ask and plead before them, we want shalom with them, and if they accept that, then they have to also accept Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach. And if they don't, then we are allowed to lehakotam hacharem tacharim otam lo tichot lahem brit velo techonem. And then finally in Gimel it says velo titchaten bam bitcha lo titen livno ubito lo tikach levanecha. So from the pshat of the Ketuvim, from the Torah's point of view, intermarriage is only these 7. Now, like I mentioned in the Gemara, there's a question about other amim as well, if that's Torah or mi derabanan or a rabbinic decree. Either way, in this period of time, we're not talking about the Shiva Amim, we're talking about the Shomronim. The Shomronim are definitely not part of that pasuk because they didn't exist. We're talking about 700, 800 years later, which means that this regulation that they're accepting upon themselves not to intermarry is not Mat Torah. It's not part of the 7 Amim. It's a rabbinic decree. So it seems like a stira. It doesn't go ahead with pasuk Lamed. Lamed says Torah Elohim shenitan leMoshe, but in pasuk Lamed Aleph, intermarriage doesn't seem to be from the Torah with the Shomronim, but rather it's a derabanan. So we're going to see that there's another 5, possibly 6 mitzvot that they accept upon themselves, agreement, that are not from the Torah at all. They're all rabbinic in nature. So that's important to note. Another interesting thing regarding this psukim, besides the fact that we're talking about Shomronim here, because that's the period of time, that's the people that they can mix in, the Shomronim around them, or the nations, the Ashdodim, as we mentioned. Something very interesting about the difference between Ezra and Nechemia. We saw that Ezra also had a problem with intermarriage, and if you remember, he did the whole drama, tearing his garments, etc. So it's very interesting to note that while Ezra, back in Perek Tet, demands that the people who are assimilated, those who intermarried, he demands that all the people expel their wives, as we saw in Sefer Ezra, when he dealt with intermarriage and assimilation. But Nechemia, he's not asking them to expel their wives. He only demands that they not marry non-Jews in the future. Right? Let's read it again. Ve'asher lo niten. That's in the future. Benotenu le'amei haaretz. Ve'et benoteihem lo nikach levanenu. That's in the future. So It's very interesting, the differences of approach. Ezra wanted the people that are already married to just break their marriage apart, divorce their non-Jewish wives, including their non-Jewish children, whereas Nechemia seems to only be talking about the future. So it's interesting that either we can say Ezra's ruling didn't have a noticeable effect, and Nechemia saw that. He saw that people are not going to divorce their wives. Doesn't matter what you say. They're in love with their wives. They have a family. Just because the Gadol Ador says to you, divorce your wife, and you say, but I'm in love with my wife. This is my family. And when I got married to them, nobody said anything. And, maybe they even got married through a Jewish marriage. I don't really know. But I do know that the one possibility is that Ezra failed. He didn't succeed, and Nechemia saw that. And therefore, Nechemia enacts something much more feasible, something that makes more sense. He said, okay, look, whoever married a non-Jew, fine. What was. We'll leave it be. I'm not going to ask you to break apart your families. But all those who will be getting married, don't marry, and you have to accept this agreement not to marry a non-Jew. This goes back to my question that I asked before about the stira between pasuk lamed and this enactment. If it's in Isur Torah, then Ezra was right. If it's in Isur Torah, they must break apart the marriage. But if it's only Isur de Rabbanan, it's okay. Let them stay married. No harm done. But in the future, like Gzera de Rabbanan, you can't get married to a non-Jew. And that goes back to the question I had is, that's not Torat Elohim. That's a gader, that's a fence, right? Meaning those who intermarried should not need to tear apart their families. So it didn't work during Ezra's time. But in the future, it's not going to be allowed. That's one possibility. Or another possibility, we can say the opposite. Ezra succeeded so much that Nechemia didn't have anything to talk about. He didn't need to say, expel your women, because all of the families that were intermarried expelled their women like their wives, just like Ezra HaSofer said so. And now what Nechemia is left is, now let's just make a written agreement that you won't marry non-Jews in the future, because there are no more mixed marriages, because Ezra succeeded, right? And now it's an agreement. So rather, only about what not to do in the future. So that's a very interesting aspect. But keep in mind that this mitzvah that they're accepting upon themselves, which is not to intermarry with the Shomronim and the non-Sheva Amim, is not from the Torah. It's not from the Torah. Okay, so that's interesting. Let's continue to the next pasuk Lamed Bet, another mitzvah that they accept upon themselves as part of the new agreement. ועמי הארץ המביאים המקחות וכל שבר ביום השבת למכור, לא ניקח מהם בשבת וביום קודש וניטוש. עד כאן, right? That's the first one. The second half of Lamed Bet is another mitzvah. So let's talk about the mitzvah that is mentioned in pasuk Lamed Bet, which means if foreigners, non-Jews, if they come on Shabbat and they want to sell something on Shabbat, right, metkachu memkar, or anything else on the holy day of Shabbat, we will not buy from them. So it's basically the mitzvah that they're accepting upon themselves in this agreement is the prohibition of bargaining, buying, and selling on Shabbat to non-Jews. That is clearly a rabbinic decree to ensure, and this is something that the Gemara talks about a lot, to ensure that people don't come to write on Shabbat, because there's an Isur Deoraita. One of the Lamed Tet Melachot Shabbat is you can't write on Shabbat. We all know that, right? Sometimes I get questions from people whether or not they are allowed to cut a cake that has writing on it, right? I'm sure people here had that question before. There's a birthday and you wrote your happy birthday and you want to cut, and there's a question, can you cut the letters? I'm not going to go into the halacha now, but a lot of poskim say you can't erase the letters because you can't write and you can't erase on Shabbat, right? Therefore, you try to cut in between the letters. Some say that you're allowed to. Won't go into the halacha now, but we clearly see that the halacha is you can't write on Shabbat. It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah, nowhere, that you're not allowed to bargain or sell on Shabbat without writing. Doesn't say you're not allowed to do that, okay? Meaning this ruling is you cannot bargain about a price, you cannot sell to a non-Jew even without writing, because lest you come to write. That's a gader, that's what we call a fence. There's no prohibition like that in the Torah. And not only that, Chazal also don't even learn this isur of mekach memkar on Shabbat with a non-Jew. They don't even learn it from psukim in the Torah. So clearly, this enactment, this new regulation is a new mitzvah. It's a mitzvah that does not appear in the Torah shebichtav. It does not appear in the Torah as Pasuk Lamed says, Torah Elohim asher nitna biad Moshe eved Elohim. It doesn't appear there. So again, the second mitzvah that they accept is not a mitzvah that appears in the Torah. So this regulation was probably instituted by Ezra and Nechemia because of the struggles over the halachot of Shabbat, or possibly due to social struggles with the surrounding nations. Aimed, I know this from Sheilot Teshuvot that I've read in the past, showing the Jewish merchants that they will be able to still make a living even if they don't work on Shabbat. There are a lot of teshuvot to this day about people who struggle with this exact question. People who own businesses and they say, if I don't open on Shabbat, I'm going to be missing out and losing a lot of money. I will, because let's face it, the world, the non-Jewish world, on Saturday, right, Shabbat, Saturday, they go out and that's where they do all their buying. They go to the malls. All the malls are open on Shabbat because on Sundays, at least in America, I'm told, they're all closed because people are resting, right, including store owners. So Saturday, Shabbat, is the time where everybody's buying. So if you're a Jew and you don't open on Shabbat, you're losing a lot of money, even today. So it could be to address that, Ezra and Nechemia are bringing forward something to strengthen their emunah, strengthen their observance, saying you are not allowed to bargain or sell anything, even verbally, without writing anything down, even though the Torah doesn't even mention it. It's a rabbinic decree. It's a gezeira. It's a takana, something that does not exist in our Torah. So we see the second mitzvah that they accept upon themselves in this agreement is not from the Torah. So again, my question goes back to Pasuk Lamed. Why is it that Ezra and Nechemia introduce it as if they're accepting Torah? It's kind of what I hear many times from a lot of youngsters today. Baruch Hashem, I give shiurim to a lot of schools, and a lot of what I hear a lot is a lot of these kids, they're very intelligent, and they say many, many times, like, half of what we do is not really written in the Torah. It's the rabbis. They're making it hard for us, right? So that's what's happening here. It's not Torah Elohim shenitan biad Moshe. Again, we're going to have to address that a little bit later. An interesting thing I found, by the way, very interesting, that in the Qumran scrolls, in the Qumran, which are the scrolls from Yam HaMelach, right, in the caves of Qumran, it actually appears that bargaining and selling is a Torah prohibition. It's interesting. Our Torah, Chamisha Chumshei Torah, doesn't mention it, but in the Megillot Yam HaMelach, in the Megillot of Qumran, it actually says in there, in Parim, some of it, that it's a Isur Deoraita. So I only can assume possibly that they wrote that in their Megillot, deriving from Sefer Nechemia, meaning they turned it into a Torah prohibition, because in our Torah it doesn't exist as a Torah prohibition. They turned it into a Torah prohibition. Either way, the second mitzvah that they accept is a takana mi Chazal, mi Bnei Adam, not Torah Elohim. Let's go to the third mitzvah that they accept. It's the second half of Lamed Bet. וניטש את השנה השביעית, ומסע כל יד. Basically, שנת שמיטה, right? וניטוש את השנה השביעית, שנה השביעית היא שנת השמיטה, ומסע כל יד, we will not work the world, the Adama, the land, also Shemitah Ksafim. So the observance of Shemitah. So it's important for Ezra Nechemia for them to accept upon themselves Shemitah. Now, Shemitah, everyone here will say it's mideoraita, right? It is mideoraita. Shemitah is mideoraita. It says in the Torah, deoraita. But I'm going to now argue that it's not deoraita in this period of time. In our book of Nechemia, it's not deoraita. Why? I'm going to ask everybody here, all those who were in my shurim, when I talked last year about Shemitah, let me ask everyone here today, are we noheg Shemitah in Israel mideoraita or from miderabanan? Is Shemitah today deoraita or derabanan?
Miderabanan.
Exactly, miderabanan. Why? Why is Shemitah today in derabanan? Because
we're not a majority.
Exactly. Now let me ask all of you now. Right now, in Shavei Tzion, in Yehuda, during the time of Ezra and Nechemia, are they a majority in Eretz Israel?
No. No, because they're in Persia.
That's exactly right. Definitely not. So therefore, during this period of the second Beit Mikdash of Shavei Tzion, right, it's definitely a rabbinic halacha. It's not Me'at Torah, because from a Torah point of view, they are exempt. They are exempt from keeping Shemitah. Yet Ezra and Nechemia are introducing another rabbinic halacha that is not mentioned in the Torah, that even when there isn't a majority, which is not what the Torah says, even when there is not a majority, they have to keep Shemitah for a rabbinic reason. Right? Because only when there's a majority, like you said, only, Harit, when there's a majority of Jewish people living in Eretz Israel, a clear majority, then Shemitah is practiced. But Chazal, starting from Nechemia, they enacted a mitzvah midirabanan that even when there's not a majority, you have to follow and be committed to Shemitah. Even
and
though
I think that's l'shem chinuch and for preparation when we will be a majority.
Yafeh me'od, but it's definitely not Torat Elohim. It's not.
Correct. Right.
So we see a third mitzvah that they accept upon themselves that is not from the Torah. Again, it doesn't fit with Pasuk Lamed that says everything they're agreeing to is Torat Elohim shenitna biyad Moshe. Interesting, right? They're not obligated from the Torah to keep Shemitah. By the way, so much so that according to the Meiri, he wrote a shoot called Beit HaBechira, one of the important Rishonim. He says that today we practice, even in his time, he lived in the 14th century, even in his time, 14th century, even in his time, he said Shemitah is only a minhag. It's a minhag, meaning really you don't have to keep Shemitah me'at Torah, because the Torah doesn't talk about keeping Shemitah when there is no majority. We, Chazal, the Gemara, and Nechemia introduced a new mitzvah of the Rabbanan. Now, why is it important for them? And here's the question: why is it important for Ezra and Nechemia to bring forward a rabbinic mitzvah of practicing Shemitah, even though they are not chayav? Simply because this is amazing, so amazing. Simply because it was, as we are now during Bein HaMetzarim, which is amazing. How I always tell you all the time, there are no coincidences. When you teach Torah, it always fits to the time that you're teaching, because one of the reasons for Galut and Churban Beit Mikdash is because Am Yisrael didn't keep Shemitah. They didn't. I'm going to share now my source, and my source sheet, and show you that there's a Gemara and a Rashi on Sefer Vayikra that says one of the reasons why there's Churban Beit HaMikdash, we are now in Tufat Bein HaMetzarim, was because they didn't keep Shemitah, and therefore, as an antithesis, what Nechemia and Ezra are trying to do is saying, I want you to keep Shemitah, even though you don't have to me'at Torah. We are going to enact something new so that there won't be a Churban of Beit HaMikdash Hasheni. Unbelievable. So I'm going to share share my screen and show you the actual mekorot. Okay, so in the Talmud in Masechet Shabbat, right over here, as you can see, Daf Lamed Gimel, it says b'mefurash, be'avon gilui arayot. This is talking about the first Beit HaMikdash. Ve'avodat kochavim, and hashmatat shmitim ve'yovlot galut bala olam. We always talk about the second, and by the way, the Rishonim on this Gemara, they talk about the fact that also on Churban Beit HaMikdash Hasheni was also because of hashmatat shmitim. So we see that because they didn't observe Shemitah, which is one of the reasons for Churban, it's important for Ezra and Nechemia to bring Shemitah back so that we don't have a future Churban of Beit HaMikdash Hasheni, even though it's not from the Torah. And Rashi over here in source number 3 on Vayikra that talks about Shemitah, et asher lo shavta, because you didn't, 70 shana shel galut Bavel, which is bidyuk Churban Beit HaMikdash HaRishon, hen hayu keneged 70 shnot hashmita v'yovel shelo shamru. Amazing, isn't it? We are in Tkufat Bein HaMetzarim. We are commemorating the days that led up to Churban Beit HaMikdash. But here we see another mitzvah that Am Yisrael accepted upon themselves in this agreement that is not from the Torah. Again, we have to explain then why is it that Pasuk Lamed keeps on saying Torah Elohim asher nitna b'yad Moshe. Let's continue to the fourth one. Now this is the starting of the second group, which have to do with the Beit HaMikdash. Up until now, 1 was intermarriage, 2 was about Mekach or Memkar on Shabbos, and the third one was Shemitah, which has to do with society. 4, 5, 6, 7 have to do with the Beit HaMikdash. But here too, we're going to see that all of these 4, besides 1, which I can't really figure out yet, but I will one day, have to do with Derabanan and not Deoraita. So let's go to Pasuk Lamed Gimel. והעמדנו עלינו מצוות לתת עלינו שלישית השקל בשנה לעבודת בית אלוהינו. Has anybody ever heard of shlishit hashekel? What have you heard of?
Machatzit hashekel.
Machatzit hashekel, not shlishit hashekel. Here, there's a talk about accepting a mitzvah called a shlishit shekel, a third of a shekel for the Beit HaMikdash work. Now, this is debatable because in the Torah, it's written like you said, Harriet, a machatzit shekel. Now, it could be, and this is kind of like possibility, but I don't think it's acceptable, but a possibility is that the worth during the period of time of Nechemia, the worth of a shlishit hashekel, a third of a shekel, is the same worth of a machatzit shekel. So it's possible to say that they're accepting machatzit shekel. It's possible. But I think during Ezra and Nechemia's time, I don't accept this. I think a machatzit shekel is a chetzi shekel. Here, there's an emphasis on shlishit, a shlish, a third. However, it should be noted that in the context of this mitzvah, it also says, Ve'emadnu aleinu mitzvot. What does that mean? Loosely translating, it means we took upon ourselves mitzvot. To take upon yourselves a mitzvah means that you're doing extra. Extra, by definition, means you're doing beyond what the Torah says. So we have a fourth mitzvah, a third of a shekel that is given to the Beit HaMikdash, is not the same machzit shekel me'at Torah. It's an added mitzvah, and it even says, black and white, Ve'emadnu aleinu, we took upon ourselves an extra mitzvah. Amazing. So, like I said, there are 2 possibilities by which one can understand the novelty of this. What is this whole thing about a shlish of a mitzvah? Why do they feel that this is important to introduce in their agreement? It's like I think there are 2 possibilities to which one can understand this new idea that Ezra is introducing, opposed to the machzit shekel that is in the Torah. So it can be said that the commandment in the Torah is to give a half a shekel for the purpose of counting Am Yisrael, for minyan Am Yisrael, right? One of the things that it's used is to count Am Yisrael. You can't count people, so you use something else to count with. So machzit shekel is one of the ways that we count. Whereas here, Ezra is using a third of a shekel for the purpose of donations. So it's an extra mitzvah. It's not machatzit a shekel. It's an extra mitzvah. Another possibility is to understand that this regulation bears absolutely no resemblance at all to the machatzit a shekel mentioned in the Torah. It's an addition to the commandment of a machatzit a shekel. And there's a Gemara. I'm not going to share my just because I say I'm running out of time. There's a Gemara in Bava Batra that basically says there's an extra mitzvah derabanan to give a third of a shekel every year to the Beit HaMikdash. So we see here a fourth mitzvah that is definitely derabanan. Definitely derabanan. Let's go to the fifth one. Pasuk. It's actually Pasuk Lamed Hey. So let's just read Lamed Dalet quickly. That the shlish ha-shekel is for lechem ha-ma'arechet u'minchat ha-tamid. ולעולת התמיד, השבתות, החודשים, למועדים ולקודשים ולחטות לכפר לישראל, לכל מלאכת בית אלוהינו. Basically, the shlishat shekel is to help the work of the Beit HaMikdash. The fifth mitzvah, again, we're going to see this is a derabanan mitzvah, is the following. Pasuk Lamed Hey. והגורלות הפלנו על קורבן העצים. הכהנים, הלווים והעם להביא לבית אלוהינו, לבית אבותינו, לעתים מזומנים שנה בשנה, לבאר על מזבח אדוני אלוהינו ככתוב בתורה. So this fifth mitzvah is basically to bring wood, to bring eitzim, wood for the altar, right? A tree, it's called a tree sacrifice. That is derabanan for sure. Why? Because according to the Torah, there should always be fire on the altar, right? That's what the ner tamid we have. The mizbeach always has to be mivuar be'esh, but the Torah doesn't tell us how the wood is brought. It doesn't tell us. It just says it's supposed to be there. How? Well, that's a question beyond the scope of Torah shenichtav. So in our chapter, Ezra Nechemia, they rule that based on a lottery, a goral, that's how each person will know when they're supposed to bring the wood to the altar. That doesn't exist in the Torah shebechtav. This is an extra mitzvah beyond what is said in the Torah shebechtav. That's another mitzvah that they're accepting upon themselves that is not Torah shebechtav. Let's go to the sixth one. The sixth one is in Pasuk Lamed Vav. Okay. ולהביא את ביקורי אדמתנו וביקורי כל פרי כל עץ שנה שנה לבית אדוני. Right, the mitzvah of bikurim. So this is clearly the oraita. Like I said before, there was one mitzvah, which is this one. I don't know how I can transform this mitzvah into a derabanan, because it's clearly the oraita mitzvah to bikurim. So I don't have an answer for this one yet. Like I said, 6 out of the 7 are for sure derabanan. This one is the oraita. I guess somewhere it could be explained to be possibly derabanan. I don't know. Either way, this was the sixth mitzvah, which is the oraita. The next mitzvah is basically psukim lamed zayin until the end. Lamed zayin, lamechet, lametet, and mem, which basically is matanot kohanim and leviim, basically trumot u'ma'asrot. Okay, now as we are going to read, trumot u'ma'asrot are clearly mideoraita, right? We know that it's deoraita. So how am I going to be able to show that this is actually derabanan? Let's read inside. Pasuk lamed zayin. ואת בכורות בנינו ובהמתנו ככתוב בתורה, Torah, so clearly not derabanan, obviously deoraita. ואת בכורי בקרינו וצוננו, right, giving the first to the kohanim, matanot לכהנים, להביא לבית אלוהינו, לכהנים המשרתים בבית אלוהים. We're supposed to bring it to the Beit HaMikdash and give it to the kohanim and to the Leviim. פסוק למ"ח, ואת ראשית הריסותינו, right, the first of תרומותינו, פרי כל העץ, you have something, a new שיבת המינים, תירוש ויצהר, we're supposed to give תרומות ומעשרות, right? You buy and you pick, not on Shemitah, on non-Shemitah years, brand new fruit. You have to give some of it to the Kohen, some of it to the Levi. Pasuk lametet. והיה הכהן בן אהרון, the כהנים, עם הלוויים, בעשר הלוויים, מעשרות, הלוויים יעלו את מעשר לבית אלוהינו, אל הלשכה, לבית האוצר, they will take what you give them and they will bring it to the בית המקדש. פסוק מ' כי אל הלשכות יביאו בני ישראל ובני הלוי. We will bring it to the בית המקדש, to the לשכה in the בית המקדש, to the area in בית המקדש, and we will bring the truma with us, dagan, tirosh, right? We're going to bring all the contributions, grains, wines, olive oil, ושם כלי המקדש והכהנים המשרתים והשוערים המשררים, right? They will stash in the storerooms where the utensils for the Beit HaMikdash are kept, and that's where the Kohanim are on duty over there. ולא נעזוב את בית אלוהינו. עלייה לרגל, we give it to them. So clearly, these four are talking about matnot HaKohanim and HaLeviim, gifts that we give to the Kohanim and the Leviim. So lichora, clearly deoraita. But the Torah shebichtav, does not say that the maaser, the tithe, must be brought to the Kohanim in the Beit HaMikdash. It doesn't say that. It just says give to the Kohanim and to the Levim. And up until now, we see from other psukim, not in this Sfarim, up until now, anyone could bring their maaser and give it to their neighbor, a Levi or a Kohen who was one of their neighbors, right? They could, I wake up in the morning, I pick some tree, and I have a Levi down the block, and I live in Haifa, or I live in Metula, or I live in the Gilad somewhere in the Golan where there's Arei Leviim, and I have a neighbor who's a Levi. I wake up in the morning and I give it to him. I'm not going to go to Yerushalayim. That's what people used to do. Now, this reality was unfair to the Kohanim and the Leviim who actually worked in the Beit HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. Why? Because it's much easier to bring the maaser and the trumot to your neighbor than to bring it down to Yerushalayim. If I live in Haifa, I'll give it to the Leviim who are nearby me. I'm not going to waste my time and travel and a couple of days to get to Yerushalayim. So Ezra and Nechemia saw that the Leviim and the Kohanim that worked in the Beit HaMikdash, they weren't getting enough trumot maaser to sustain them. They were only getting it from those who were there. Or they didn't want there to be a situation where that's what's going to happen in the future. They didn't want, hopefully, they assumed that Am Yisrael will grow and we will reconquer all of Eretz Yisrael, and we will have people living all the way up north and all the way down south. And they didn't want a situation where the ones who are working in the Beit HaMikdash don't receive anything. So they enact something new that does not exist in the Torah. It's a new system where they have to bring it to Yerushalayim and give the Trumot U'Maasot there. And this new system, to bring the maaser to the Beit HaMikdash, to Yerushalayim, emphasizes basically the whole purpose of Trumot U'Maasot to support the Leviim and the Kohanim who could not work the land because they were busy working in the Beit HaMikdash. So clearly, even though Trumot U'Maasot is a deoraita, they enact a ruling of a derabanan, that you have to now bring it to the Beit HaMikdash, because in the Torah it doesn't say that. Meaning they built upon themselves 7, although 6, like I said, I can't explain Bikurim, maybe somebody here has an idea, but 6 out of the 7 for sure are not what Pasuk Lamed says. Pasuk Lamed says, Torat ha'Elohim asher nitna biyad Moshe Rabbeinu. And this is darshan, but I have a solution. We can see, like I said, from all of these regulations, that they are not straight from the Psukim of the Torah, except like Bikurim. Rather, they're added mitzvot or added guidelines, like with the Maaser. This is the first time in our Torah, for sure Chamishah Chumshei Torah, but all of the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim as well, the first time we have explicitly seen and read, and we read here, new additions and regulations to the Torah. Any other time, like in the period of the Melachim, when the Nevi'im are landing it into the Melachim because of what they're doing, they don't introduce new derabanan mitzvot. It's all straight from the Torah. This is the first time where leaders of Am Yisrael, meaning Ezra and Nechemia, are introducing new mitzvot that do not exist in Torah. And that's darsheni, because it says that they're teaching them only Torah Moshe. But it's not, right? It's not for nothing, though, I think. that Ezra is perceived as, I think, I don't know if Rosie is here. She asked me about learning Midrashei Chazal, all about Ezra. So those who know some of the Midrashim about Ezra and the Gemara, it talks about the fact that Ezra was the first of Anshei Knesset HaGdolah. He was metaken takanot, according to the Gemara. And we see here that that's what he really does. He's metaken takanot. In fact, this is the beginning, this perek. Like I said, this is an amazing perek. There's no perek like this in the entire Tanakh. Perek Yud. And you should remember this. This is the beginning of the establishment of the Torah Shebe'al Peh. The Torah Shebe'al Peh. This is the beginning of Torah Shebe'al Peh. Up until now, everything we learn in the Torah is always strictly Torah Shebichtav. Now we have Perek Yud of Sefer Nechemia. He is introducing Torah Shebe'al Peh. So when he goes back and he says in Pasuk Lamed, this is Torah Elohim, Asher Nitan Moshe, he's basically saying, Gvirotai v'Rabotai, everyone is there, right? We said everyone is there. All of the signatories and all the women and all the men and they're all there and they're listening. And Ezra is saying, this is also Torah Moshe. It's an oral Torah. It's not written, which means that these decrees of Mekach and Menkar Shabbos, though it doesn't say it explicitly in the Torah, it does in the Torah Shebe'al Peh. So Ezra and Nechemia are introducing for the first time in our entire Torah, Torah Shebe'al Peh. Mamash. It's an amazing thing, as opposed to all other prakim. So in conclusion, this agreement that the people are undertaking, basically there are two things. One, they're accepting upon themselves the obligation to accept the Torah, the written Torah again. And another one, these 7 new clauses, which are to strengthen the society, to strengthen the Avodat Beit HaMikdash and its workers, and the assurance of a good society with good Jewish character. And from here on, there's a development of the great Knesset Assembly, the Anshei Knesset HaGdolah, who continued to amend regulations and decrees. And it starts in our perek. We see from here new things, but not new. I introduced it as new, but really what Ezra and Nechemia are saying, these are not new. This is Torah Elohim. This is Torah Shebe'al Peh. So for all those children that ask us and come to me as a Rav and they say, Rabbi, these are something that the rabbis enacted, my answer is, this is Torah Shebe'al Peh. That's what Ezra and Nechemia is doing. And that's what Pasuk Lamed comes to teach us. That it seems that it's not the Torah because it's not written in the Torah. Ezra is saying, there's another Torah, part of the Torah Shebichtav. It's called Torah Shebe'al Peh. So even more important, Pasuk Lamed, which talks about the written law of Torah Moshe, is referring to the oral law, to the Torah Shebe'al Peh. And this really is mamash, truly amazing. Because for the first time, towards the end of the Tanakh, really the end of the Tanakh, the first time we're being introduced to Torah Shebe'al Peh, black on white. Torah Shebe'al Peh in writing. That's amazing. We're being introduced to Torah Shebe'al Peh in writing, and it's said that the Torah Shebe'al Peh is also Torah Elohim Asher Nitna Biad Moshe Eved HaElohim. It's an unbelievable perek, and there's an agreement here. We all, our ancestors, are accepting upon themselves not only Torah Shebichtav, but also Torah Shebe'al Peh. Really, an amazing agreement. So that's all for now. I want to wish everyone a Shavua Tov. Next week is Tzom Tisha B'Av, so we won't have a shiur. It'll be too difficult, I think, for many people. Also, we're not supposed to be learning Torah on Tisha B'Av itself. So even if it's not so difficult for people, we enjoy this shiur very much, and you're not supposed to learn Torah that you really enjoy. You're supposed to dafka learn Torah that has to do with the the Churban. So Be'ezrat Hashem, there will be next week a couple of shiurim. There's hopefully there'll be a English shiur at nighttime after Eicha, and in the morning there'll be 2 shiurim as well. So Be'ezrat Hashem, I hope to see some of you there. So I'm wishing everyone a wonderful week and a Chodesh Tov, and we'll meet here, I guess, in 2 weeks. Be'ezrat Hashem. So Shavua Tov.